Okay, welcome everyone. Be starting in less than a minute. Got a few people here already. Hello, Ted. Hello, Dow. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Okay, I thought this evening I'm going to share some thoughts about the Aggañña Sutta. I know I've done this before. It's one of my favorites, but I'm going to perhaps approach it from a couple of different angles. The Aggañña Sutta, Digha Nikaya number 27, is the Sutta of Origins, and it's very likely, it's sort of the Buddhist Genesis, and I think it's very likely there's a Indo-European cognate there between Gen and Gan, Genesis and Aggañña. Because it means, they both mean the same thing also, origins. We know that in Buddhism, there is no ultimate beginning. Samsara is conceived of as beginningless. As far back as you go in time, there's always a yesterday. However, for any individual world system, such as ours, there will be, or there has been a beginning, and there will be an ending. There's a finite, although very long, period of time in which a world system exists. The force that brings a new world system into being is said to be the accumulated karma of all the beings who perished in the destruction of the previous world system. When these beings die, they, with the exception, of course, of arhants, when beings die, they still have karma and craving outstanding, and this is the energy that causes them to take rebirth. And in the special case of a new world system, there are billions or trillions, really, of beings that perished in the previous world system who have no place to be reborn, and their accumulated karma generates new worlds. And the formation of the new worlds begins from the top down. That is, the Brahma worlds come into being first, and then the Deva realms, and finally the human realm and the lower realms. The Aggañña Sutta details part of this process, the origins and development of the human race. There have been different interpretations of this sutta over time. The Buddhist scholar Richard Gombrich has an essay or an article about this sutta where he says it was intended by the Buddha as a kind of satire or a critique of the Brahman's view, and it kind of begins in that way. I think he's partially right, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. At the beginning of the sutta, the Buddha is in discussion with some Brahmins, and the main focus of the critique is on their understanding of the caste system. According to the Brahmins, the castes are divinely ordained. Brahmins, who they consider themselves to be the highest caste, sprung from Brahma's forehead. The Kshatriya, or the warrior caste, sprang from his shoulders. The merchant class sprang from his belly, and the Suddas, or workers, sprang from his feet. So the caste system is of divine origin and can't be questioned. The Buddha critiques this by presenting a more naturalistic origin for the castes as a social convention. And this comes in at the end of the long sutta, where in the final sections of the sutta, after the humans have evolved to the state of that we would recognize as human, they divide into castes on purely practical occupational basis. And it isn't divinely ordained, it's a natural or sociological development. And a couple of things to be said about this. One is that, as always, the Buddha orders the castes differently. He puts the Kshatriyas, or warriors, on top, which is probably the older Indo-Aryan system. And the priests, over time, the Brahmins usurped that and made themselves the top caste. And we know that in the Sangha, the caste system was disregarded. The monks from any caste, including the outcasts, the chandalas at the very bottom, who were despised, socially despised by the other castes, all of them were allowed to ordain, and their caste was forgotten. They were ordered only by seniority. But it would be a mistake to think that the Buddha was crusading against the caste system as a social construct. He accepted it, I think, as a natural convention, a social convention in the lay society. He didn't actively criticize it. He saw that, as probably most pre-modern humans did, he saw some kind of social hierarchy as natural. So we should be careful not to retro-con Buddhism into modern ideas. The Buddha was not a modern person. He was an ancient Indian, and his agenda was for the liberation of beings and the ending of suffering. It wasn't for social reform or achieving equality in the broader society. He pretty well left that alone. So the kind of social aspect of the Aggañña Sutta is found, which Gombrich talks about, is found in the first section and again in the last section. But in between is the I think the more interesting part that describes how human beings came to be on this earth. And the critical moment at the very beginning is that beings from the Abhasara Brahma world, which is the second jhana level, beings that are described as being luminous, moving through the air, feeding on bliss. They were beginning to descend to the lower levels that were coming into existence. And the earth, the level of the earth was just newly formed, and it was still very unformed. And originally it was all covered in water, and it was dark. It said the sun and moon were not manifest. It doesn't say they didn't exist. It says they were not seen or not manifest, which seems to imply that the earth was covered in dense clouds. And so far, this more or less agrees with modern scientific geological history of the Earth. The atmosphere was very dense in primordial times before the arising of life. Then the Abasara beings were basically, we would say, in orbit around the Earth. They were flying through the air around the Earth and curious about it. And as the Earth formed and congealed and solidified, there appeared on the surface of the water something called oja, which is described as a nutritious foam. And the commentary says it was like the skim on boiled milk. The Abasara beings became curious about this foam, and some of them took it up on their fingers and tasted it. So they immediately, having incorporated solid matter or gross material matter into their being, they fell to earth, and they were now more of a gross material form rather than this luminous spiritual type of being. So what this is the critical moment in the sutta, and what this seems to represent on a mythological level is that our being as humans is at least in the spiritual aspect of our being, is descended from a higher plane, from this Brahma world. That consciousness descended into the earth and took material form. There is in science, there are a number of unsolved mysteries in the history of the earth and life, and one of them is the origin of life itself. How did life come to form? And many people have approached this question without really solving it. There's a kind of a general theory that's accepted, it's mostly sort of accepted by default, that there can be naturally occurring amino acids, organic molecules, in an inorganic environment, and then somehow with the input of energy from outside, either lightning strikes or cosmic rays or supernova or something, it caused the molecules to combine and form more complex forms of DNA, RNA, and proteins. There are a number of difficulties with this theory. Mostly to simplify it a bit, the underlying problem is that for a organic living cell to exist, you have to have nucleic acids like DNA and RNA in combination with proteins, and it's difficult to imagine how these various components could have arisen simultaneously and be functional. And no one's ever really solved this problem. This is, to my way of thinking, this is the underlying problem with the materialist bias in scientific thinking, that if one allows that there was an input of consciousness from a higher level into the earth, this could explain the arising of life, which is complex, a complex structure that seems to be intelligently designed. So there are thinkers currently of a school they call intelligent design that are kind of a more robust approach to creationism. The problem that I see with any kind of creationism or intelligent design is that the history of life, as we can see it from the fossil record, appears to be a series of stumbling advances. It doesn't appear to be an intelligent, worked out plan. So the Darwinian model, the purely materialist model, fails also on a number of points. In this origin of life is one of them. But if we can conceive that some higher consciousnesses became involved in the material structures in the earth, they became entangled with it. You know, it may be this Oja represents the soup of amino acids, and it wasn't a blind lightning strike, but it was an intervention or the entanglement of higher level beings into this physical structure that allowed life to begin to structure itself. The Aggañña Sutta then goes on through a series of stages. We don't need to get into the details, but the life forms represented by these fallen Abhasara beings gradually devolve. They become more coarse and more material, and eventually turn into what we would recognize as human beings. You know, these sorry two-legged specimens that are walking around. And then the final section of the Aggañña Sutta describes how the human beings organize society, establish kingship, and divide into castes and so on. So we get back to the social question. Well, one thing that is striking in this sutta is that is something that's missing. There is no description or explanation for how animal life arose, non-human life. It's entirely focused on the human beings. There's some talk about the plants as exploited by humans, and how, you know, rice is a descendant of through many steps of a concurrent devolution from the original Oja. But there's no mention of animal life. And this brings up another mystery in science, something that's unexplained, is that after the origin of life, however it came to pass, there were hundreds of millions of years where there was very little change in the life forms. They were one-celled creatures, and a few worm-like, very simple multicellular creatures possibly existed. There's some ambiguity in the fossil record about that, but there was no complex life of any sort for a very long time. And then all of a sudden there was an event that they call the Cambrian explosion, and what happened is that in a geologically short period of time, just probably a couple of million years or so, there arose all different phyla of life. Pretty much all the phyla that exist today arose during the Cambrian explosion. You know, 80 different, radically different body plans emerged, quite complex organisms, um, everything from annelids and mollusks to uh, arthropods and vertebrates and everything else. And it's puzzles science. They're not able to explain how radically different body plans could emerge. And it's almost in the period after that to the present, there's almost no example, or possibly no example, I think it's a little bit ambiguous, of a new phyla arising. The great majority of at least, possibly all of the phyla that currently exist of animal forms arose during that brief explosion, Cambrian explosion. So this is something that the materialist Darwinists have difficulty explaining. Certainly, the Darwinian theory or model has a lot of validity to it. Life forms do evolve by selection. There's no doubt about that. But the idea of where the changes come from, if it's strictly random mutation, it doesn't seem to work for events like this. If you have a radically different body plan as, say, an arthropod and a vertebrate, for one to evolve from the other, or for both to arrive from a common ancestor, would require many, many intermediate steps. And in the Darwinian model, each intermediate step must be a selective advantage. And it's difficult to see how a complex structure where all the interrelated parts have to work together could arise. So I would like to, well, first, before I go on to my speculation or hypothesis on this, I'll also say the other side, the creationist side, also falls short here, because it doesn't seem logical or sensible to imagine that a supremely intelligent, all-powerful creator would stumble around for so long with dead ends, like try out trilobites. Oh, they don't work too good. Okay, a little bit later, okay, we'll go for dinosaurs. So that doesn't work either. No, it doesn't seem like this is the work of one intelligent, all wise, all powerful mind. But there's a kind of stumbling towards more elaborate forms of life. So I think this is another candidate for in the fossil record for the activity or intervention of some higher intelligence, not an all-powerful one, but something becoming involved in life forms. And this is entirely my own speculation that's come to me, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think a candidate for this might be the deities of the fifth sensual heaven, the Nimanarati Devas, the Devas who delight in creation. In their realm of existence, their control over their external environment is entirely mental. They create what they want. If they want a palace, a multi-story palace, they just imagine it and it becomes real for them. And they can change form, change color, change shape, and whatever they wish or think of, they can create. I've thought that a possible mechanism for how this might work is that perhaps they have total control over collapsing the wave function. But however you want to think of it, they create their own environment. So it may be that as the Earth came into being, some of these beings who their entire existence is an enjoyment of creativity and playing around with form. And this is their play. And some of them may have thought, oh, look, there's this coarse material level coming into existence. Now, this might be something fun to play with. And they might have taken these crude organisms and reshaped and reformed them and tried out different forms and shapes and different body plans. You know? It certainly seems, even if this is not exactly correct, it certainly seems that there was some kind of activity other than purely mechanistic materialist workings going on here at this moment in time. And you have all these various different forms arising. Remember the original seeding of consciousness was by the Abhasara beings, and now they might also have been just striving to, this is another possible hypothesis, they were just striving kind of incoherently or blindly, trying to establish themselves in more sophisticated vehicles for their mind to express itself. There are also in the history of the human race, there's also quite a bit of mystery. There's something that occurred about, I think it was about 50,000 years ago, called the Paleolithic Revolution, that for hundreds of thousands of years, human beings had been living basically the same way, very crude existence, simple stone tools, fire, and then all of a sudden, in a relatively short period of time, there was an explosion of new technologies and art forms. You have these gorgeous cave paintings in southern France and Spain, and quite elaborate technologies of for hunting and for processing food and so on. This is the Cro-Magnon period. It seems that this is possibly another candidate for some kind of activity of mind or higher minds in involving themselves in the earth. So what I'm trying to do here is somewhat reconcile the mythological framework of the Aggañña Sutta with the known historical geological record. I think it's not possible to take something like the Aggañña Sutta completely literally, but as a myth, a mythological structure is very powerful and quite possibly explains quite a bit of how this human existence came to be in the beginning, from the beginning of time. And the most important point is that our being is descended from a higher plane and became entangled in physical matter, in the sense desire plane. The Brahma gods are in the plane of form. They're beyond the desire or of the senses, and their enjoyment at that level is entirely internally generated. It's like the jhanic bliss. So what one of the implications of this from our point of view is that when we meditate and we're bringing the mind into deeper samadhi and entering jhana, it's like a remembering. It's not discovering something new. It's going back to a more natural, primordial state of being. It's kind of remembering, oh, this is how it used to be. So I think this is this way of thinking is a middle path between the mechanistic materialism of the purely Darwinian approach and the entirely arbitrary will of a creator of the creationist approach. These are not the only two options. There is a middle ground, that there is activity on the mental or spiritual plane that interacts with the physical, and that is the result, and this results in life and humanity as we know it. So those are just a few speculations. I see that the chat is already filled up with comments or questions. Let me scroll back and see what we got here. Well, here's an interesting question. If the karmic energy of beings gives rise to a new world system, then wouldn't the tremendous energy of billions of Christians now and historical cause of Christ to arise in the subsequent cycle? Now, possibly it could generate another Christ figure. I don't see that as impossible. Venerable Ajahn, is it venerable to chant the Attanayataya Sutta every day for protection in houses? Because I've heard some monks say this Sutta or Purta invites yakas or other evil beings to the house. No, it drives yakas away. It doesn't attract them. This is what this is that chant that's used to purify places from demonic beings. Someone's asking about something called an Orion Bodhisattva. I don't know about that. That sounds well. The word Bodhisattva implies that it's a Mahayana conception. So I don't know if the distinction. I'm not sure of the distinction. I would speculate it's the higher Bodhisattva bhumis. In the Mahayana, the Bodhisattvas have 10 levels or 10 bhumis that they develop through, and I have heard that the sixth bhumi, I think it is considered to be the equivalent of stream entry. So higher than that would be Orion. I'm not real sure about this. I saw a monk explaining Sakaya Ditti as letting go of 5 aggregates. Is this correct? I thought it's not getting attached to both extremes. No, it is. Sakaya Ditti is a personality view. It's the idea that there's a real self in the real person or personality in the 5 aggregates, and seeing the 5 aggregates as empty is overcoming Sakaya Ditti. What are sankharas in the dependent origination? Could you explain a little more about it? The sankharas in dependent origination Well, the word sankhara has different shadings of meaning depending on the context. The most general meaning of sankhara is any conditioned thing. So everything except nibbana is classed as a sankhara. But in the dependent origination, it specifically refers to volitional formations, that is, karma making activities of the mind that arise from ignorance. So it's a subset of the broader meaning of sankhara. In the five aggregates, sankharas refer to all mental formations. Is there a description of Brahma realm by those who experience jhana? If they have only sense of hearing and vision, how do they live in that realm? Well, we have the descriptions in the suttas and the commentaries. If they have only sense of hearing and sight, how do they live in that realm? That's all they need as functional senses, because they're not seeking pleasure or experience through the senses. So the senses are for them entirely functional or mundane. They just allowing them to get around and so on, and in the first Brahma level, at least, to speak to each other. Since they don't eat, they have no need for taste or smell, and they don't have any need for the sense of touch. Their existence is their being is of a subtle material plane. It's not coarse matter like here. So that they're more like spiritual beings. Is the acceleration in present day AI somewhat similar to what happened in the Cro-Magnon period? Possibly. There were these periods in history when there's a rapid increase in some kind of technological or scientific understanding. I think that Cro-Magnon period is probably the first one that we know of, but then there's scientific revolution of the 17th century, and now we're seeing this development of AI. Who knows where that's going to lead? That's a whole nother topic, but I've got my doubts that any kind of computer-based system will ever be actually conscious. All they're doing is manipulating algorithms. Are you familiar with Professor Donald Hoffman, who argues that consciousness is fundamental and not space and time? His latest book is The Case Against Reality. No, I've not read him. He sounds interesting. I have read Bernardo Kastrup. He's another one who's has the idea that only is what he promotes a philosophy called idealism, and from a quite scientific point of view, he says that only mind is real, and there is what we perceive as the physical universe is the shared content of many minds. There's a meditative state where Arahant can abide in nibbana while being conscious. This is different from Nirodha Sampati. Yes, I think it is different. Can you explain how the fourth Rupa Loka is not permanent if it is never destroyed? Okay, to set the context for this question, for those who don't know what he's referring to, in the cosmological system, there are series of destructions that destroy more or less of the universe. Destruction by fire will destroy everything up to the first Brahma level. Destruction by water goes up to the second Brahma level, and destruction by wind destroys everything up to the third. The fourth is never completely destroyed, and this is discussed in the commentary as it's not a violation of the law of impermanence, because it's only a convention to identify it as a level. Each individual Brahma at that level has his own place, and that eventually comes to an end. So that the components of that realm are impermanent, but the realm as a whole is never wiped away. Can you explain if all world systems ever get destroyed at the same time? This is also a uncertain point. There are different interpretations in the different texts between the Visuddhimagga and the Sarvastivada and Abhidharma Kosha. There's at least 3 different models of how the destructions work. And in one of these models, the whole universe is destroyed when the destruction comes by wind. So it's possible. Can beings be born into other world systems, or are they always stuck in the same world system? I think in general they stay in the same world system. There's many stories in the suttas and the commentaries about rebirth, and it's always within the same world system, or I should qualify that perhaps a little, or in or from one world system to a subsequent world system. Like when this world is destroyed, it's replaced in the same space by a new one, and beings over long periods of time are reborn that way into several new iterations of the same world system. But there's no kind of horizontal movement that I've seen. The only exception to that is that there's one position, I think it's in the Visuddhimagga. There's one position that's put forward as tentatively as like some say, it's not laid out as a doctrine, that at the end of the world, if there are beings in the hell realm that have not yet served their time, they're reborn into a hell of another world. Avijja, Pachaya, Sankara, and then Vijnana, then Namarupa. How can there be ignorance, Avijja, without a mind, which arises afterwards? Who's doing the ignoring, or is this a translation problem? Well, there's always a mind. You have to see the dependent origination as circular. That from ignorance in past lives, actions have been taken, Sankara, which then results in Vijnana, or Patisandhi Vijnana, rebirth consciousness that then arises in a new form and generates Namarupa. The Sutta provides a narrative of degeneration. What implications does this hold for a practice of Sila? Yeah, it has a very strong relationship to Sila, because the degeneration through these various stages is generated by the beings practicing bad Sila, by being harsh to one another and lying and stealing and so on. This causes a degeneration. And there's also outside the text of the Aggañña, but in other places there's such as in the preceding sutta, the Chakravarti Sutta, there's a sequence that human beings are supposed to be going through over very long periods of time, where the sila degenerates, and the lifespan shortens along with it, and then it bottoms out, and there's a period called the sword time, 10 days, when they just kind of hacking each other, and most of the people are killed, and the survivors come together and say, why are we killing each other? Why don't we practice non-killing? And just by beginning that, by taking one precept, their lifespans start to increase. And as they take on additional virtues, their lifespan increases more and more. And there's a cycling up and down. And the extremes are said to be the longest lifespan for human beings is 80,000 years, and the shortest is 10 years. And this, in the course of one world cycle, this is supposed to cycle up and down 20 times. Regardless of whether we're in a period of generation, this suggests an innate tendency towards moral decline within us if we don't consciously strive against it. I think that's true. It's so much easier to fall into the lower realms. One has to make a conscious effort but it becomes easier as you make a habit of keeping sila. Everything has a beginning. No, I don't. I don't agree with that statement. I don't think there's any reason why things have to be conceived as having a beginning. They just always were. Why is there samsara, the world at all, and not rather nothing? Yeah, that's a really deep question. I would say it's primarily our ignorance, because we don't and desire. This is the teaching of the dependent origination. We generate the world. We generate samsara through our craving and ignorance. Okay. Take a couple more. If computers are just manipulating algorithms, how is Namarupa causing consciousness in us? Namarupa doesn't cause consciousness. It's the other way around. It's the order of the dependent origination. I am reminded of the Gnostic idea that consciousness entered into was trapped within materiality. Yes, yeah, this idea that consciousness somehow got entangled with materiality is not is found in different places as well, other than Buddhism. Gnosticism, yes, is one example. And in more modern times, there's Rudolf Steiner, who has a interesting kind of a model that I think is at least partially derived from Buddhism. Our world system is completely destroyed. I was wondering if there's some remnants left over. Could the dinosaurs, etc., be from previous destruction and then we come along? No, not in the traditional model in the text. It's said that when the world is destroyed, it's destroyed down to the last grain of dust, that there's nothing at all remaining. I saw in the Sutta, the Buddha says his time is samsara. He lived in all planes of existence. The only exception was the pure abodes. That's because the pure abodes are the realms where anagamis go. That is, someone who's reached the third stage of enlightenment, and from there they become arahants and pass out of existence. So if he had been in that realm, he wouldn't be around to be a Buddha in this time frame. If the Baka, the Brahma, is a Mahabrahma of another world system, if Brahma Sahampati is our Mahabrahma, then isn't that evidence of him being born in another world system, since in the past he was Buddha's friend? Yeah, I suppose that's possible. It's this is another place where the texts are kind of obscure and contradictory, that it's really difficult to come up with a coherent scheme of the nesting of levels of Brahmas, that there's Some Brahmas oversee 1,000 world systems, others 10,000, and so on. And it's difficult to break it down into a simple scheme. What is the Pali word for fear? Bhaya, Bhaya. And how can one contemplate fear? And is fear a division of Satipatthana? It's not listed in the Satipatthana, but yeah, fear is a mental object, and one should be aware of it, and not. It's a very debilitating mind state. It's a very negative, harmful mind state. One should be aware of it and not succumb to it. Oh, and one sutta, the Buddha talks about overcoming fear by not running away from it, not changing postures. So if fear arises while sitting, continue sitting until the fear passes. If it arises while standing, continue standing until fear passes. And I think that can be taken both literally as a meditation advice and also metaphorically as don't try and run away from your fear, but face it, go through it, come out the other side. Okay, let's see. Considering the origination of the four castes, how do we reconcile the existence of humans who do not have a caste system? I am an Indian born in a Hindu family myself. Well, this is the Buddhist view, is that the caste system arose entirely in the conventional way as a social convention amongst humans, and it's not divine or inspired for all time. In fact, in one place, he recognizes the existence of societies that have no caste system, and this is one of his arguments against the caste system being of divine origin. He says that we have four castes, but the yonas have only two, free and slave. Yonas being the Greeks. So he saw that other societies could organize themselves differently. Okay, I think I'll leave it at that for this time, and thank you all for coming, and we'll see you again next week.